The extraction genre is going to be an interesting space to watch as game designers. In 2019, I think, things really took off when this obscure and niche game called Escape from Tarkov grabbed people's attention. When something like this happens, the industry takes notice. Studios around the world saw an opportunity, and I bet you all the rubles that conference rooms around the world filled with presentations on how to take this compelling niche genre mainstream. Why does this happen? Well, because there's a solid opportunity here, and the first studio that takes this genre mainstream will reap some meaty rewards. And if that sounds familiar, it's because it's a pattern within the industry. Think of how the MMO space played out, or how the MOBA space played out, with Dota, then Heroes of Newerth, and then League, or more recently with Battle Royales, right? Where we went from PUBG to Fortnite. Now we've seen a few new players step into the extraction space, but of all the players that have joined the ring so far, the one that I think shows the most promise is Dark and Darker. And there's a ton we can learn from here on how this game is shaping up. But for today, I'm going to just focus on one major innovation. Because if YouTube metrics have taught me anything about you all, it's that you seem to have a short attention span. Also, about 97% of you doesn't seem to be subscribed right now, so while you're here, consider doing that. It'll do me some good. Anyway, let's dive right in and talk about how Dark and Darker's innovations are helping them win the extraction genre, and more importantly, what we can learn from them as designers. The extraction genre is built around a simple loop. You go into a map, do some looting, compete against others, and either die or extract with your riches. Then you repeat. Regardless of whether you succeed or not, each iteration of the loop is a learning experience, and finding success in these games relies heavily on the player gaining knowledge from every iteration of the cycle. The more you play, the more success you'll have. In Tarkov, your first time experience is as follows. You log in, create your character, and you're given a stash with some basic gear and a starting loadout on your character. Then you pick your map, queue up, wait for the game to load, and then the match begins. If you are new to Tarkov, odds are you're going to die, and you'll probably die within the first minute or two, which sends you right back to where you started. Now when you die in these games, you get that itch to jump back in and try again. Now here's the problem. In order to play again in Tarkov, you have to do the following. Heal, assemble a new kit of some kind, select the map, queue up again, and load into the map hoping that you survive long enough to learn something new. The one major issue I want to talk about today is the fact that your iteration time in Tarkov is really long. From your moment of death to loading back into a map, you could be looking at anywhere between 5 minutes all the way up to 20 minutes before you're back in again. And since your early raids are likely to end within seconds, this means you spend the majority of your precious time not actually playing. Let's take a look at a quick example. I loaded up Tarkov for the first time in a few wipes for this video, and I did 2 runs on the Streets map. It's a map I haven't played before, so it's new to me. On my first run, I died within 2ish minutes, but I learned where 2 spawn points are. And then when I loaded in a second time, I was close enough to my original spawn that I knew I was about to run into someone, and then I died within 50 seconds. Overall, I played about 3 minutes of gameplay, but the recording was for around 20 minutes. Now let's take a look at how Dark and Darker handles this. In Dark and Darker, you log in, create your character, and you have a default kit on your character already. You press play, load into a lobby instantly, fool around a bit, and shortly afterwards the match begins. Now just like Tarkov, odds are early on you're going to die pretty quickly because you're still learning the game. But again, each death is a learning opportunity. But unlike Tarkov, you can actually load into your next match within seconds. This is incredibly important because it cuts down on that death time between raids substantially, especially early on when you're most likely to be dying a lot. And it actually allows you to follow that impulse of I want to jump back in almost immediately. So how do they cut down on this iteration time? Well, let's get some of the simple stuff out of the way first. For one, they've simplified the systemic end of their game by streamlining healing and doing away with things like hunger and thirst. When you respawn, your character is healed and you don't need to spend any time messing around in your stash trying to heal and feed your character. More importantly, when you are queuing into a map, that happens within seconds, or at worst within a minute or two. They also do this clever thing where they load you immediately into a lobby and then into a map. Now the lobby is actually brilliant because it fills your time with things to do. You can test out your weapon against targeting dummies, you can inspect other players to see what you might be up against, and most important of all, you can pet the dog. The lobby has that added benefit of exposing you to other players' builds and their cosmetics in a safe place that kind of encourages you to monetize, teaches you a little bit, or inspires you to try out different builds. Or, you just goof off a little bit with people before you jump in there and fight them. Okay, so no healing and nearly instant requeuing sounds pretty good so far, but the most impressive innovation is what they do with the death penalty and your kit. By default, each class has a starter loadout the game just gives you whenever you die. The kit has everything you need to find some success as your chosen role. This loadout is pretty basic and all the items are of the lowest quality, but it means that early on in the game you aren't wasting a lot of time rekitting yourself. When you're first starting to play, as soon as you die you just hit the play button and you're in the match again. And later on, when you gain more experience and knowledge and you begin to engage with the itemization system by buying and kitting out your class to your liking, it does increase your iteration time, but at that point you're more invested in the game and its systems anyway, so it's not so bad. This is also incredibly smart because it does away with that sense of anxiety you get as a beginner in these games, because you don't have anything to lose. You can just focus on learning the game and you don't have to experience that bitter sting of loss until way later on when you start to feel more confident and more invested. It also sidesteps some degenerate behavior that you see in games like Tarkov, where players are loading in with no equipment and running around trying to grab whatever they can because they've become loss averse after losing too many kits. Now, this innovation has one major downside, but the crew behind Dark and Darker are actually iterating on this design in subtle but very intelligent ways between their alphas. Here's the problem. When you load in as a player and you have a custom loadout that you invested in, it feels really bad when you fight another player and then realize when you're looting them that they're just a basic player with a starting gear set. You just risked your own loadout fighting another player and you got literally nothing from it. What's worse, if you used up some expensive consumables in the process, you actually netted out negative from the encounter. This was a more serious issue in earlier playtests, but in playtest 4, they nudged their existing mechanics masterfully to solve this without making any major changes. What used to happen in earlier playtests is you'd load in and you'd be seconds away from another player, which means you're almost immediately guaranteed to fight someone. In playtest 4, however, they changed their map layout and their spawn points to do one of two things. You either spawn immediately near some loot and away from other players, giving you time to fight some PvE threats and do some looting of your own before encountering someone else, or you spawn in a very high tier location that has a lot of valuable loot, but another group of players is also nearby. This changes your psychology just enough to make that earlier issue just a little bit more bearable. In the first case, where you spawned away from other players and near some loot, it ensures that by the time you're fighting someone else, you've already done some looting and so have they. So if you defeat them, there's something on their body for you to loot, which makes it a little bit more palpable if they are just a basic player with a basic loadout but they have some lootables on them. And in the second case, if you spawn near some high tier loot and you encounter another group of players, now the psychology of the encounter is also a little bit different. You are fighting them to secure the right to loot the spot, so it doesn't matter if you kill them and they have nothing on them. The fact that they died means you gained the right to loot the valuables. Okay, let's summarize. The extraction loop is as follows. You load in, you compete against other players, you extract either by winning or by dying, and then you learn and you repeat. To find success in these games, you need to learn by doing, which means your novice players are more likely to die early on and a lot more often. Taking a long time to load into another session creates a rough edge that's likely to grate on less committed players. In Dark and Darker, they innovated on this by doing two things. First of all, they reduced the systemic complexity by automatically healing your character and not having mechanics like food and hunger. Second of all, their map loading times are cut down significantly. By throwing you into a lobby and having a much shorter matchmaking time, they get you in matches quicker. The lobby also has the added side effect of allowing you to inspect other players, admiring their cosmetics, socializing, practicing your swings, and of course, again, petting the dog. Lastly, and most important of all, they give each class a starting loadout that gets you right back into the fight. This loadout gets you going, but it is of a very low quality which doesn't trivialize the loot mechanics. They then iterated on their design by adjusting their map layout and spawn points between their alphas to ensure that players bump into each other and fight each other, either when they already have some loot on them or when they're competing for high tier loot. There's a lot of amazing things about Dark and Darker that I could probably yap about for another 30 minutes or so, and I might do that in future videos. But for now, I hope this little breakdown showed you how as designers, you can begin to design away rough edges in niche games without sacrificing what makes them special. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you liked what you saw here, please consider leaving a like or a comment to help with the algorithm. And hey, if you really want to go nuts, consider subscribing, as it'll do me some good. Thanks again, everyone, and I'll see you all next time.